Hello, once again. Welcome back to another episode of the Contrarians. This is going to be another one of our regular shows, our classic format, where we basically, one of us has an album that we think is a little bit of a dark horse album in terms of calling it the favorite album by a band. And this week we're going to be looking at Alice Cooper. Now, we've done Alice Cooper before, and Marco actually was on the hot seat for that one as well. And at that point, we looked at Flush the Fashion, but that was a mix of the solo career and the group career, and we thought, well, let's just look at the group. And this is certainly on my mind lately because my Alice Cooper book, which was a full color throughout big thick thing, is now getting cracked into two, and it's going to be coming out as a trade paperback. And the first half is going to be all about the original group, and the second half is going to be the solo years, essentially. So we've got two different titles, two different smaller books, less color on them. And by the way, I just received the last 7 copies of the original full color throughout Alice Cooper group. So if anybody or book, so if anybody wants that, let me know kind of right away. I haven't even opened the box yet. But yes, so this has been on my mind as well, splitting this up between group and solo career, and it's certainly on the minds of the guys all the time because of the sort of acrimonious split that happened at the time. But before we get there, let me just give you a very brief history of the Alice Cooper group. So essentially, this is a band that was started in Phoenix. They started right in high school. They actually started as a fake band. They went on stage and just mimed to some Beatles stuff and realized, hey, this rock and roll stuff's pretty good. Gets the girls too, right? So they also kind of started learning instruments, and they started a band, and they were always dramatic and cinematic and kind of a horror thing. Even right from the beginning, called the Spiders. They had a spider's web, and they had a coffin and all this stuff. Then they eventually changed their name to the Nas, and this is in conjunction with a move to LA. And so they were a band in LA, and they were one of the first kind of glammy bands, I imagine, a band that had a lot of glam clothes and stuff. They had girlfriends that were like getting clothes for them and making clothes for them. And so they started playing around. And they adopted the name Alice Cooper, and there's this whole, rigmarole story of why that is. We won't go into that, but it's kind of a cool name for a band, different name. And they put out a couple of albums that are pretty strange, Easy Action, Pretty's for You and Easy Action. They got signed to Frank Zappa's label. Frank Zappa thought they were just really weird and out there, and they certainly were. So they got signed to Straight Records, and they put out these 2 records. Then things started moving up. They transitioned over to Herbie and Frank, kind of got them over to Warner Brothers. And they're on Warner. It was very touch and go at that point, but they happen to have a hit with I'm 18. So Love It to Death comes out on Warner, actually straight/Warner. And then later on, they got Killer, they got Schools Out. $1 Billion Babies was kind of the big one of the band. And by this point, they're getting kind of really tired. They're being worked to death. They're putting out lots of records really quickly. They're a huge band by this point. They're kind of like the scary it band of America at this point. And I remember, like it was yesterday, I can see the picture in my mind. I always thought it was Time magazine, but it was Newsweek magazine. Alice Cooper was in Newsweek magazine. It looked really scary, like the whole look with the makeup and the clothes with kind of like stains on them and rips in them and stuff like that. It looked very, very scary. I mean, Alice was definitely the original, Marilyn Manson, Slipknot, Rob Zombie, that kind of thing, right? Slayer, Kiss before Kiss. So essentially, they do $1 Billion Babies. We're up to 1973. Then they do another album in 1973, Muscle of Love. It kind of falls flat, doesn't have any hits, comes packaged in this weird box that caused problems in the record racks. It had this stain built into it at the bottom where people thought it actually was stained. So that caused all sorts of problems. But essentially, they have this big run of records from Love It to Death, so their third album, up through Muscle of Love. And eventually, not right away, but, big band selling a lot of tickets, playing big places, but and selling a fair number of records, but it takes some time for all this to happen. But what does happen is essentially they have Love It to Death eventually goes platinum, Killer goes platinum, Schools Out goes platinum, $1 Billion Babies goes double platinum, and Muscle of Love goes gold. And then at that point, what happens is they're having problems with Glenn Buxton. Just to give you the members briefly, Alice Cooper, obviously on vocals, Dennis Dunaway on bass, Michael Bruce on guitars, Glenn Buxton on guitars, and Neil Smith on drums, the platinum god, the big tall guy with the long blonde hair. But Glenn Buxton is kind of the biggest problem in the band, drinking and drugs and stuff, and he's kind of falling out of the band. So that's causing a lot of problems. They're having just problems basically with exhaustion. Alice is drinking a lot as well. And it just looks like, okay, we're going to have a little bit of a break. There's all this controversy about how Alice has maybe semi rewritten history, that the band didn't want to do theatrics and stuff anymore. So essentially there's a break at this point. The band kind of goes on a break. But Alice doesn't really go on a break. Him and Shep get together and they plan a show that's even bigger, and they have a big hit album in Welcome to My Night, where while the other guys are kind of looking around confused, nothing much happens with them. Alice is off to the races with the new band like nothing happened. It's literally the next year. And the Alice Cooper guys, nothing happens for them. They eventually put out an album calling the band Billion Dollar Babies, this album called Battle Axe, which wasn't very good. The show was super expensive. It didn't work properly, didn't sell any tickets, and that was knocked on its head right away. So essentially the guys, there's really not very much history for all the Alice Cooper guys moving forward, but Alice, of course, goes on to a big solo career. So let's leave it at that for the history of the band. Let's turn it over to Marco now and find out what he thinks the greatest Alice Cooper group album is. Marco, take it away.
Thanks, Martin. We did do an episode on this, and I'll just briefly touch on that a little bit later. I did pick Flush the Fashion for that. I'm just going to do a quick little, this is why I picked that one. Because at that point, we did incorporate the entire discography of the Alice Cooper Band and Alice Cooper solo. But based on some of the research that I've done, like after the first two albums, I'm not going to go super contrarian and pick one of the first two albums, although like I appreciate what they did on those first two albums. But the band relocated to Detroit after the first two albums. And for the history part of it, that's really like, it doesn't get too far before I pick my favorite Alice Cooper album, and it is Love It to Death. And I think that influence that they had from the Detroit scene, as well as Bob Ezrin's production and influence on the songwriting, I think made a big difference with this album. I do appreciate the first two albums. They're not my favorites. I don't find a lot in there that I'm super interested in, but like I appreciate that there was the Beatlesque stuff and experimental and psychedelic kind of stuff with those first two albums. But what I think is when Bob Ezrin came along, I think he helped them to influence their songwriting style for Love It to Death, which is the album that I'm picking. To really tighten up some of that stuff, but also use some of that stuff to their advantage on Love It to Death. But he also got them to really tighten up and really write some really cool, straight ahead, like rock and roll, hard rock, almost on the edge of heavy metal songs for this album, which is my favorite Alice Cooper album. Basically, like they go to Detroit. I love the Detroit scene, MC5, Stooges, all of that stuff. And I think that had a positive influence on the band. Like hard rock, it has elements of like almost punk sounding in a way. There's elements of heavy metal in there. And now just because something's heavy doesn't make it good. But I like when it's heavy, I like it because it adds like an edge. It gives it kind of like a cool kind of thing going on, especially at this time, because in 1971, there's not a lot of heavy metal albums out at this point, right? I think Black Sabbath had like two albums out. Budgie, I think, had their first album come out in 1971. The Moves, Looking On is pretty heavy. That came out in 1970. There's only one or two Deep Purple Mark II lineup albums out at this point, maybe Fireball and In Rock. So like there's not a lot of heavy metal stuff at the time. So to me, this kind of fits in there. Like I wouldn't classify Alice Cooper as a heavy metal band, but this is there's some stuff in here, especially on stuff like Black Juju, like the guitars in there and just the attitude of some of these songs, the lyrical content, the musical composition. Some of this stuff is almost heavy metal, almost, especially for 1971. That's something that I like about this album a lot. So they're in this kind of like heavy metal territory. They're kind of breaking new ground. I think they're marching into this territory confidently. like literally even with the drums, like the drums kind of have on some songs like a marching kind of sound, which is something that I like. The production, the overall atmosphere of the album, along with Killer. So I like Love It to Death and Killer are probably my top two. I would go with Love It to Death over Killer just based on a numbers game of how many more songs I like better than the other one. But they're really, really close. Right off the bat for Love It to Death, I mean, they just swing the doors wide open with Caught in a Dream, 18, Long Way to Go. Like just three incredible, straight ahead, hard rock tunes. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Bob Ezrin helped them to narrow in on some good melodies and music composition for these songs, especially compared to the first two albums. It's like when it gets to Black Juju, now I don't often like songs that are really long and have experimental parts and kind of, Black Juju for me kind of goes through like little ups and downs. Like there's parts of it I really like and then parts of it that are kind of drawn out a little bit. I know I might get some flack for that. I'm being very nitpicky. I'm trying to be objective here, but I love how heavy Black Juju is in terms of the guitars and the attitude. But there's also heavy stuff on Love It to Death in general, just in terms of like lyrical content. Right? Like Second Coming, Hallowed Be Thy Name, like that's kind of borderline like religious blasphemy. At the time, there wasn't a lot of things that were influencing heavy metal. Like these guys are, influencing heavy metal. I mean, look at the heavy metal scene later on, like what they do with like religious blasphemy and things like this. Like this is really like embryonic of those type of things, if you think about it, right? Like, and even the Ballad of Dwight Fry, which is one of my favorite. To me, that's the epitome of Alice Cooper, is that song right there, the lyrical content of that song. And when you look at the instrumentation, like they're writing stuff back then. And again, if you want to talk about like proto stuff, the Ballad of Dwight Fry to me is almost like Diary of a Madman, the song. And if you listen to it, to me, that's heavy, Ballad of Dwight Fry. And there's acoustic guitars, there's piano on there. Like they were able to reach a kind of like really cool, I guess, prototype of heaviness without even really being what you would think to be a traditional heavy metal song, right? That's one of my favorite tunes off that. I pretty much like almost the first side completely, other than the little ups and downs with Black Juju, although I think some people would probably disagree with me altogether. But again, I'm being nitpicky. Another thing I like about the album, the guitars, the guitar riffs. A lot of these songs are like jammy and riffy, which make them really cool. Just opening riffs on some of these songs. Even Alice Cooper's, I don't know if you'll call him Nick or Alice at this point, but Alice Cooper's vocal performance is incredible. I don't think anybody would argue that Alice Cooper is technically a great singer, but I mean, look at the range that he has on his vocals on this album, the growly, the screaming, you know what I mean? Like he does a lot of stuff on here that's like really cool. He's not technically a great singer, but he's a great vocalist. And I think he shows a lot of range on here in a lot of these songs. I mean, even just the confidence to pull off something like Ballad of Dwight Fry and to do stuff like that says a lot. In terms of like musical performances by the band and by Alice Cooper as a vocalist. Back to side two, Is It My Body? Has that great breakdown after the chorus and the lead guitar riffs. None of the songs are hits on this album, but they all have a hook. And I'm 18 was the single from this album. That's kind of an unconventional single. I mean, like now it's a live staple of Alice Cooper, right? And that's the classic song from this album is I'm 18, but for them to put that out, and it did quite well for them. I think it reached number 21 on the US charts. It's a bit of an unconventional single, which I kind of like too, right? The only song I probably don't like on the album is Sun Arise. That's my least favorite. Although even that one, like I kind of like after the song gets into it near the end, they kind of have a repeating gang vocal thing. I like that part of the song. That's when the song starts to lift up for me. That one's a cover song too. And I think it's been recorded by quite a few different acts. That's where the album kind of falls flat for me. And I think the Alice Cooper band had a problem with ending albums because a lot of their albums kind of just crashed for me with the last one or two tracks. This one, the least so. I find like basically just the Sun Arise is the one track where it kind of falters for me. And that's the last tune on the album. But I do like the little part at the end. So there's even something about that I can kind of say, yeah, I can point to and say, yeah, I kind of like that part of it. But basically, like I like how the album is very cohesive. A lot of the songs don't even really end. They just kind of flow into each other. So it does promote like just a single listening experience. So that's something cool about the album. You know, when I listen to Love It to Death, I really want to listen to the whole thing, start to finish. Yeah, Second Coming. If another thing about this album too is if I did like a top 10 Alice Cooper songs or top 5 Alice Cooper songs, there 3 of my top 5 would probably come right off this album, like straight up. Caught in a Dream is one of them. Second Coming is another one of them. Ballad of Dwight Fry. And then if I fleshed out an entire top 10, I could probably pick a couple other ones. Like I'm 18 for being as, I don't want to say overplayed, but for being a classic staple, one of those tedious songs that you hear all the time. That's probably one of my favorite ones that I don't often get sick of. You know, if I were going to rank the albums in general, I would probably put Love It to Death at number 1. Killer would be a close number 2 for talking Alice Cooper bands. Billion Dollar Babies would be my number 3. Muscle of Love would be 4, and Schools Out would be 5. And then the first 2 albums, you could put 6 and 7 on there. But I like Muscle of Love a little bit better than Schools Out. Schools Out is probably my least favorite after the first 2 albums. But yeah, overall, it's hard, it's heavy, it's breaking new ground. There's really cool performances on it. The songs are all really good. When you look at the track listing, like for me right away, as soon as I see side 1 and side 2, I'm like, oh yeah, both of those sides are solid. And there's only little bits at the end of each side that I can nitpick and say, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of those types of things. But other than that, I mean, like the album did well too. It was certified platinum. You know, it was a good launching point for Alice Cooper band. One little tidbit I picked up, we actually just did a heavy metal trivia last night with our Patreon subscribers. One little tidbit I picked up was that apparently for the cover album, Alice Cooper is doing something unsavory. I guess he's using his thumb to like project that it's his penis coming through the cape or something like this. Apparently
this is the censored version. I don't think it was on purpose. I think it just kind of happened in the picture.
Yeah, so they actually we did a trivia question last night. They actually photoshopped his entire arm out of the cover, apparently.
Oh yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Later on, yeah.
What a great band shot on the back, though, eh?
Absolutely.
Like that's just one of the classic band shots of all time. They look totally scary there, right? And on the front too. And on the front, they're kind of more vampiric looking, and here it's they're smiling a little bit, but this is more just straight rock and rolling, right? But yeah. Anyway.
But yeah, other than that, I mean, just to throw back quickly, to the influence the first 2 albums had on this, like there is a little bit of experimentation on here, but I don't find any of it to be like so irritating or offensive that like I just can't listen to the song. There's a little bit of stuff on Black Juju. But the stuff that I like about Black Juju is enough for me not to want to like have to skip that track, where I feel like it's a little overboard on the first 2. I have a hard time listening to the first 2 albums. And I know there's some people that love them and that's great. But anyways, in general, for me, this is where the band really picks it up. They got the really cool songs and I think it sets the template. And I don't think they ever really top it, especially with the Alice Cooper band albums. Now, I know that there's some albums that you're going to bring up and we can kind of go back and forth on that. And I can explain why I like this one a little bit better than those ones, but I'm a big fan of the Alice Cooper band. This one just wins out for me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, to me, my favorite is Billion Dollar Babies. I just love the packaging. I love the hits. I love the kind of the brightness, the slight more cheeriness to it, and just the more confidence. To me, this record, one of the funny things about this that I've really kind of just realized, or it's really sunk in, this and Somewhat Killer are the only 2 albums on the face of the earth that sound like the first 2 Blue Oyster Cult albums. The first 2 Blue Oyster Cult albums are this strange mix of a fair bit of hard rockiness, some psych, and a lot of Doors. And literally, I playing this front to back recently to get ready for this, I just realized what a strange sound this album has, and the only albums in the world that sound like it are Blue Oyster Cult, and Blue Oyster Cult Tyranny of Mutation. I think the heaviness gets a little overstated with all of the Alice Cooper group. It just seems to be this thing that you hear all the time. And when I play the records, I don't really find it very much. I mean, I actually do kind of like Sunrise. Sunrise reminds me of the first 2 albums a little bit. And Ballad of Dwight Fry, I find to be kind of like an early David Bowie with the acoustic strumming kind of thing. But there's a lot of Doors on here. Like I say, there's Blue Oyster Oyster Cult, although it's before Blue Oyster Cult. A lot of Ray Manzarek kind of stuff. But what I do like about it is it does create this really strange singular mood. I'm not crazy about the production. I know Bob Ezrin, one of the big things he did with the band is really tear the songs apart and have them make sense when he went up to the farm in Pontiac there, for those sessions of trying to turn this into a good album. And yeah, the band was really happy with him making sense of it. Just a few comments from our Patreon subscribers. Mike LeBrain says he picks Schools Out. He says, not a bad song on Schools Out and a wicked concept. Interesting. Schools Out is one where a lot of people say there's only the main awesome heavy metal song, the anthem about ripping everything out of your lockers and throwing it on the ground on the last day of school and all that. And then the rest, a lot of people don't really remember much. But Reed Little says Killer will probably always be my favorite Alice Cooper Band album. Billion Dollar Babies is a great album, but I only remember 2 songs, the title track and No More Mr. Nice Guy. Killer has Under My Wheels, Halo of Flies, Dead Babies, Be My Lover, and even Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. I never get tired of the album. I'd probably put Love It to Death at number 2 and Billion Dollar Babies at number 3. John the Music Nut says Killer is a great balance of catchy garage rock and longer, darker tunes that border on progressive rock. Every track is stellar, so he's picking Killer. Joe Becht says facetiously, where's Raise Your Fist and Yell? But yeah, Joe, this is about the original group. Peter C. Jones says, I love all the original Alice Cooper group recordings, but Billion Dollar Babies just hit it out of the park. Production, songs, mood, attitude, I agree. Everything just fell into place. Reed also says it's Jamie doing the video, right? No, well, he's wrong about that. If he doesn't pick Prettiest for You, I'm going to be pretty disappointed. And the Patreon poll has Billion Dollar Babies at 11 votes, Killer at 6, Love It to Death at 5, Schools Out at 5, Muscle of Love, Easy Action, and Prettiest for You all at 0. That is literally almost like the consensus of the world out there. And just a few others in terms of rankings. Kerrang had it, my notes say 7th, 3rd. I guess it was 7th overall, 3rd with the group. Yeah. Behind Killer and Billion Dollar Babies. Billion Dollar Babies usually wins this poll. Killer usually comes 2nd. And then Love It to Death, you'll hear. I mean, it kind of usually is 3rd, but Schools Out and Muscle of Love are kind of, next in the tier, and then the first 2 are the final tier. Louder Sound had it first. Then Killer, then Billion Dollar Babies, then Schools Out. I've massaged in here Welcome to My Nightmare because always that one comes up super high. I've often called that my favorite of the entire catalog, Welcome to My Nightmare, because I have such memories of that movie coming on and the album and the tour. Not that I went and saw the tour, but 1974, 75. So basically, that's probably my favorite of them all. And then Billion Dollar Babies, like I say. Ultimate Classic Rock had Love It to Death 3rd after Billion Dollar Babies, then Killer 2nd. 4th, they had Schools Out. 5th, again, Welcome to My Nightmare. They're mixing it in. Most of the polls mix the catalogs together, right? Classic Rock History had Billion Dollar Babies first, then Welcome to My Nightmare, Schools Out, Love It to Death, so it came 3rd. Then they had Easy Action, which is pretty bizarre. Best ever albums went Killer, then Welcome to Nightmare again, not a solo years album, first one. The Schools Out. Hang on, where was it? Best ever album. Billion Dollar Babies, Love It to Death was 4th. Then a few more solo years albums, then Schools Out. A list on Rate Your Music had Welcome, Schools Out, Billion Dollar Babies, Love It to Death, Killer. Chaos Spin had 4 solo albums first. And then the first band album was Billion Dollar Babies, then Schools Out, then Killer, then Love It to Death. So it came in 8th. Return of Rock had Welcome to Nightmare, Alice Cooper Goes to Hell, Billion Dollar Babies, Love It to Death. So it was coming in 4th of the umbrella. Pete Pardo, Sea of Tranquility. He went with Billion Dollar Babies, then Killer, then Love It to Death. And then Welcome to My Nightmare, Schools Out, From the Inside, Muscle of Love, Brutal Planet. So yeah, again, very conventional. Pete does lean towards the early catalogs of a lot of these bands. So he's got 3 Alice Cooper group albums to begin with, and they are, the exact order that most people would vote for. In terms of playing songs off this live, I'm 18 is absolutely a huge song. It's been played roughly 2,767 times of 3,168 shows. but School's Out is always played as well. I'm 18. Under My Wheels is always played. Billion Dollar Babies is always played, down to No More Mr. Nice Guy at pretty much every show. Ballad of Dwight Fry came in 8th. Isn't My Body, you're starting to move down a little, 16th. Long Way to Go, occasionally way down at number 56. But yeah, pretty influential album. Just a couple other interesting things to say about it. The Ramones were inspired. Joey based the song, the group's first song, "I Don't Care," on the chords of "I'm 18." Of course, we know, the legend has it then that Johnny Rotten auditioned for the Sex Pistols with "I'm 18." Right, and then we've got let's see, we've got Pat Smear from the Foo Fighters. Went to pick up the guitar at age 12. He went on to found the Germs first, tour second guitarist for Nirvana, then play rhythm guitar for Foo Fighters. But Love It to Death was a big one for him. And then, it's got many accolades over the years. As I was saying, I mean, it did go gold right away, so it was a hit right away, but it took a long time to get platinum. I think it was 2001. It was certified platinum. Alice Cooper has always done well in Canada here, where Marco and I are, and basically it was considered Warner Music Canada's first album by anybody, or first band, Alice Cooper, first band to have 4 albums sell over 100,000 copies. So 4 albums all went platinum for Warner there. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got on it. I suppose you're fairly contrarian, because I think any deep Alice Cooper fan could pretty much predict and knows the running order of the rankings, and that would almost always be Billion Dollar Babies, then Killer, and then it's up for grabs, right?
Yeah,
some people will have a School's Out fondness. Some people will have a love it to death. So
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yep. No.
No, I get Billion Dollar Babies as the conventional pick for number 1 for Alice Cooper Band. And I love that album. I think the production's incredible. I think that's where you really start to see the Broadway musical type of elements coming into the Alice Cooper Band, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. That's cool. I kind of like the maybe little rougher production, heavier type of stuff for me personally. That's why I picked Kiss Hotter Than Hell is a good example of that, right? And I love the track listing on Billion Dollar Babies. The thing for me is, and we talked about this last time with the Alice Cooper episode that we did, it's really the numbers game, I guess. And with Billion Dollar Babies, I find that that's another one that crashes really flat near the end for me. The last 3 tracks in a row, Sick Things, Mary Ann, and even I Love the Dead, all kind of don't really do it for me. Although there's things, again, I Love the Dead, there's things that I like on that. There's some cool jazzy Zappa-esque type stuff going on there. So just for me, it's the numbers game, and I Love It to Death a little bit better. And if you look at the Billion Dollar Babies, if you look at the tedious songs that get played over and over again, I mean, that one's got Billion Dollar Babies. It's got No More Mr. Nice Guy, which are good tunes, right? But those are the ones you hear all the time. Love It to Death has the least amount of those, I think. It's got I'm 18 and maybe I guess you could say Ballad of Dwight Fry. But I feel like there's a lot more stuff on there that's heard less often, and it's a little bit more of, I guess, the underrated album of the Alice Cooper Band albums, in my opinion. And it's Killers right there. They're kind of neck and neck. And the reason why, again, I went with Flush to Fashion was because looking at the entire track list, I like every song off Flush to Fashion. So that's how I was able to argue so hard for that one, was because I said, okay, I don't really like Sunrise. That kind of has a 60s kind of pop thing going on with it that song kind of falls flat for me. And there's parts of Black Juju I think goes a little bit drawn out. So I went with Flush to Fashion because, yeah, start to finish, I like every track. But I think that's, I love, and again, I'm nitpicking. I love Billion Dollar Babies. I like Killer. I like Love It to Death. They're all right there. And I like Muscle of Love a little bit better than School's Out, but that one's still number 4 for me. So
cool. All right. Well, we'll wrap up there. Let us know what you guys think in the comments below. We've got a Patreon situation. We've got shirts. We've got a Ko-Fi situation as well. The Patreon thing is really cool because we do little group panels, and you've seen a lot of our videos on YouTube on that, where I really like this Dark Horse series that we're doing, where we get the panel together and we attack one album that's a bit of a Dark Horse album by a catalog. But yeah, join us on Patreon, and then you can be part of those panels. And for Marco and myself, go play some Alice Cooper.